have to thank for getting these things upgraded. I was at that one city council meeting and oh my God, thank goodness. Yes, people say.
It'll be reduced. That's my life. I just have a home.
Look,
But actually sitting out there, you city council's talking, we can't hear a word, or before, couldn't hear a word.
Sounded better than Monday night.
I didn't get to come Monday night, so how did your thing go? So you got the change approved that you were going for Butteville? Oh, I thought it was Butteville Road?
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
I see. Okay, how do you feel?
Well, I did feel like I could like bite somebody's head off, but I'm a lot better now that I find out we don't have to do that second one.
Yay.
That second one about the residential.
Hi, Charlie.
That's all reasons. Yes, he sets up all the criteria as the reasons. He doesn't have a logical. Hmm? They're all the ones for this. Back.
They did
Back to the-
my name.
Oh.
I hit it on it while I was away against the wall.
Can you blow it down? Glue it down?
Oh, do I want to glue it down? I had a Band-Aid.
I think I would.
We're gonna change up the agenda a little tonight and do the extensions of, what am I trying to say? The Light Point subdivision, they have requested a continuance, and we're gonna do that first.
Do I have-
For the spec thing, not that the spec
Okay.
is so long, but let the Bright Point people,
Oh, some of them are here. Okay,
since we're not doing.
Okay.
anything.
so just move that we continue their hearing.
Well, there should be. I think that we're gonna write up
Here it is.
a speech. Yeah, yep, yep, yep. Oh, and proposed motion.
Oh, good, okay. Want to propose a motion? Yeah, there's one right there, all written out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the Bright Point people have requested a continuance. So it'll be 30 days from now. And the reason is, if you read through that stuff, it says, if the county retains control.
It's 150,000 something, and if we do, it's 48.
And if the city gets control, then it's gonna be this or that,
Mhm.
and they're letting that progress a little bit. What that's about, do you know what that's about? Do you understand that?
It was,
Is
who
it-
had the ownership or whatever of it, or controls it.
Control, and the city wants to get control so they can rebuild that Butteville Road, Parr Road intersection.
Right.
Okay, and it gets a little complicated because it's also outside the urban growth boundary. So what has to happen is the county has to bless it. Then the city has to go before LUBA to get an extension of the urban growth boundary.
Huh?
Then it has
Wow.
to be annexed into the city.
Oh, my God.
Yeah,
And so it's this continuing process to get this done, because ultimately what they want to do is this spec property today is going to continue Evergreen all the way down to Parr Road.
Right.
And the design that they want to do for traffic is to have all that industrial traffic and probably some of the residential traffic come down Evergreen, rather than going north on Evergreen up and hitting the bypass. You know, what we call, I call it the bypass,
The
but
interchange?
the interchange by going north on Evergreen is to go south on Evergreen, hit Parr Road, go out Parr Road to Butteville in front of Amazon, through the rounder and then to the interchange. That makes sense?
yeah.
I don't understand how they, north on the south side of it.
Let me see. if I can draw you a
Charlie, did I
picture.
hear you say that we're not going to be discussing that particular item
And the
tonight?
piece of property right now we're talking about is this piece right here.
I don't know, maybe you guys.
Instead of
Here's
just-
Chris, Deb, who else out there? Annabelle?
Yes, here.
Is-
Chris Lassen as well.
Up here.
I kind of wish instead of rerouting everybody
get
just to
some
go to
assist-
the other side, we could just open up that
and into the
bypass,
interchange.
the overpass to the I-5 and make it an exit, you know, on and off ramp. That would be awesome.
Parr Road is right here. And then the traffic pattern will go.
So are we actually going to be discussing that, or is it going to be continued?
Up here.
Amazon's right here.
Mhm.
From
Mhm.
Amazon Around here. into the- So instead of pushing that stuff through the residential areas, we go out.
They'll be on a couple of country roads, basically.
We'll see how that traffic
Are
works
you
out.
stealing my thunder? I was gonna explain all that.
Just explain it.
I mean, so this thing, this thing is another 200
He works on it
something
now,
thing
shoot.
that they want to go.
Okay.
What's that, houses?
Yeah, this thing.
Oh. I mean,
What we're gonna do it first. Check, can you hear me now?
okay, here's your motion.
When should I do?
We just hope- I'll say go. Dan is a man. Every time he does something, I mean, like you want the exclusion on every single thing. They want the exclusion on the lot coverage, the sides. I mean, but you see, I don't think that any of that to say, well, it's your exclusion. No, it isn't. It's that, no, that isn't it. And this is just setting us up to be,
Each time it gets,
well, it's setting us up to be, have the city council refuse us again, one that we've, so I'm glad we're not looking at it. I gotta get my ducks in a row, but I didn't really take that much time to look at it because I wasn't.
Hey, folks on our call, can we have everyone do a sound check, please? Lisa, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, the state doesn't cost $600,000 if the city doesn't turn it anyway.
Thank you. Chuck?
Hear me now.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you. What about Ralph Henderson?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Sounds good. Max, are you up there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Deb, I think I heard you just a couple minutes ago.
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you very much. And then Annabelle? or it might be frozen. And then I can hear Chris. Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
See Annabelle, but she appears frozen on.
Are we ready to go?
We are now, sir.
Pretty sure.
Oh,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlie Piper. I'm the Chair of the Planning Commission for the City of Woodburn. This is our regular scheduled meeting for January 12th. Roll call, please. How about now? Okay. Nope, I'm not gonna go, but I'll start over again. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlie Piper. I am the Chair of the Woodburn Planning Commission. This is the regular scheduled meeting for January 12th, 2023. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Hernandez Mejia. She was on. Maybe she'll call back in here in just a minute. Commissioner Berlin.
Here.
Commissioner Corning.
Here.
Commissioner Bartel.
Here.
Commissioner Lassen.
Here.
Vice Chair Ellsworth.
Here.
And Chair Piper.
Here. Would everyone please rise and join me in the flag salute?
Under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Commissioners, in your packet, you will find the minutes for December 8th. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, Chair would entertain a motion to approve.
So,
I move the second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of December 8th as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Business from the audience that is not otherwise on this evening's agenda. Okay. Communication.
The only communication is related to the items that are going to be on public. We have public hearings on this evening, and one of them includes a request for a continuance.
Okay. We have two public hearings tonight. We're gonna, if you're looking at an agenda, we're gonna mix up the agenda a little bit tonight. Start with the Bright Point subdivision because they have requested a continuance. Is there a motion to continue?
Point of order, Chair Piper, just a request that we officially open the public hearing before we reset for a new date, so we don't have to issue a new
Do we need to
or
do,
publish a notice.
do we need to do the declarations then?
Yeah, I would recommend that you go through the declarations, open the public hearing, go through the declarations, and then entertain a motion to continue the public hearing to a date certain.
Thank you. I declare the public meeting open. This is for design review 22-02 variance.
No.
22
I'm sorry, the Brighton Point's the other number, excuse me.
Let's try this again. This is a type 4 design review. Annexation 22-03, 38 acres, which includes request for phasing plan. 22-02 subdivision, 22-04 variances, 22-07 zoning map change, 22-03 generally located at 8708 Parr Road. I will ask for potential conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or site visits.
No.
Hearing none, are there any challenges to the commission? Hearing none. Do we want to read the public hearing statement? Okay,
I move to continue this item, ANX 22.303, EP 22-02, sub 22-04, hearing 22-07, and CMC 22-03, Brighton Point subdivision to the February 9th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting beginning at 7 p.m.
I'll second.
it's been moved and seconded to continue the Bright Point subdivision hearing. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. The public hearing is temporarily suspended until further notice. At this point, then, we will move to speculative industrial development. This is a type 3 land use application package for a 513,193 square foot industrial building, which includes requests for design review 22-02, variance 22-01, street exception 22-01, generally located at the terminus of Evergreen Road. I will declare the public hearing open. Again, I will ask the commission for potential conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, and site visits.
So this is Commissioner Bartel. This is my neighborhood. So I don't know if you consider that ex parte contact or what. So I didn't really know much about it until I read the materials that Chris dropped off or somebody dropped off at the house, but it is 2 blocks from my house.
Okay, anyone else?
I'll just mention, can everybody hear me?
Yes?
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. I'll just make a note. I actually lived there 2 years back for nearly a year, but so I'm just familiar with the area.
All right. Anyone else? Are there any challenges to the commission? Hearing none, we will move to the public hearing statement.
Okay. Both Oregon law and the Woodburn Development Ordinance govern evidentiary quasi-judicial land use hearings and require that at the commencement of the hearing, this statement be read to all persons in attendance. The applicable substantive criteria for this land use decision are listed in the staff report and are also as follows. Woodburn Development Ordinance sections 2.04, 2.05.06,
At least on my end, I've lost sound. I can't hear anyone.
City Council, you are on mute and we can no longer hear you.
Sorry about that. That was that was my fault. I was trying to find a hissing sound that was coming through. If you're not speaking on the other end, if you wouldn't mind keeping your microphones on mute. And I'll correct my end as well. Thanks.
Chris, did you put the mute on before the beginning of the public hearing statement?
Halfway through your statement.
Okay, I'm going to pick up at the applicable substantive criteria and just run through it one more time, just in case. So the applicable substantive criteria for this land use decision are listed in the staff report and are as follows. Woodburn Development Ordinance sections 2.04, 2.05.06, 3.01 through 3.07, 4.01, 4.02, 5.03.02, 5.03.03, and 5.03.12. The hearing will proceed in the following general order: staff report, applicant's presentation, testimony in favor of the application, testimony in opposition to the application, rebuttal, closure of the record, deliberation, and decision. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria just stated or other criteria in a plan or land use regulation that the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise a constitutional or other issue relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party wanting a continuance or to keep the record open must make that request while the record is open. Chair Piper.
Thank you.
Mr. Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Kerr, the Community Development Director. For those watching online, can you see the main screen for my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So this is, as was just described, a project it's located at the northeast. I call it the future corner of Evergreen and Parr Road because this project will involve an extension of Evergreen Road down to Parr. There's no address for it right now. And of course, the action that you're required to take is on a type 3 land use application. So you'll be the decision maker on this case. It involves a design review specifically for a new industrial building, variance from the driveway spacing requirements in the WDO, the Wood Burn Development Ordinance, and street exceptions for certain right-of-way improvements and standards. And I'll talk about each one of those shortly. This commission decides on all type 3 applications, and staff report and its attachments are officially entered into the record. And I have just in case I forget, in front of you is a recommended modification to a condition of approval, as well as a letter of support, which came from Lennar Properties, which is a property that's, if not adjacent, catty-cornered to this one. And I'll talk about those at the end. Before I get into the details of the actual site plan and the criteria, I think it'll be a good idea for me to provide a little bit of background and some context, basically related to the site and sort of the history of this project, how it got here, because it relates directly back to a lot of these conditions of approval and the way the site's been designed. On the screen, you'll see I have a aerial photograph of the area. Of course, we got I-5 on the northwest side. This is the southwest part of the city. You see Butteville Road, and in purple is the UGB. That's our urban growth boundary for the city, as it was until 6 years ago when it was officially modified. And the yellow line is the urban growth boundary. As you know, the city went through a very long, complicated process to expand our UGB. And one of the big sticking points was about the land in this southwest region. The city's desire was to bring in more industrial lands we wound up calling the Southwest Industrial Reserve, the SWIR. We refer to it all the time. And what happened was that a portion of those properties, let me try to bring them in here, you see in blue, came in as SWIR. So the subject property that is boxed out here at the end of Evergreen Road is actually part of that UGB expansion that occurred, was finalized again just over 6 years ago. Since that time, you can see that I have the city limits written or drawn up on here in red, just to highlight some of the development activity that's happened here in the last 5 years. Over on the northwest corner here, you see the Amazon site. That's a property that's under development, which was actually annexed in by the spec team as well 5 years ago. The subject property is included in this area. And I have Smith Creek highlighted in here. That was annexed and has been under development. That's 900 or so dwelling units. In the just north of the subject property and a little bit to the west is a project called the Stacy Allison Apartments that came in. We have some residential apartments, or pardon me, single family homes that have been annexed and under development adjacent to Centennial Park. And if I went further north, you'd see even more development activity. This body, of course, is very familiar with everything that's been going on out there. All of those developments have been before you. Another piece to this sort of puzzle I want you thinking about, because again, it plays into this particular site, is the urban reserve. Now, an urban reserve is an area of land that has been identified by the state and recognized as the next piece of the UGB expansion puzzle. So the next time the city wants to expand their UGB, they need to go and look at this urban reserve area first. And again, I'm just calling out the subject property, which is located just north of it. That urban reserve area is an area that the city has already gone out and is looking to start the next UGB process, right? It's a very complicated process. There's a lot of data and analysis necessary. One of the big key parts to that is to go out and analyze the existing inventory of commercial industrial properties we have in town. The city's actually already gone out, and we just had on Monday evening, our city council approve a contract for us to start that process, to start looking at some of that doing that analysis. And if it justifies a UGB expansion, those would be our next steps. Again, this isn't directly related to the site, but I do think it's important that everybody has kind of an understanding how these pieces fit together. And I'll talk about a few more of these sort of subject pieces around. And because I really want everyone to understand how this particular project, this industrial development being developed in the SWR as part of the properties that were brought into the UGB for this purpose are being brought in as permitted uses and filling in what I kind of call this puzzle piece. Now, over in the intersection of Butteville Road and Parr Road is a very challenging intersection. As you can tell on the graphic that I have, that property's within the city's UGB, but it hasn't been annexed into the city. That means it's under the jurisdiction of Marion County. That particular intersection, just here's to highlight it, it's sort of a remnant connection that happened when the overpass went in. It's not in a good location. Nobody would put that intersection at that location today next to the bridge. There's grade issues that are really significant, and there are significant safety issues there. And again, this particular intersection is located in the county and in the county's jurisdiction. But because of all the activity that's been going on out here, the city's desire to make something positive happen within that UGB, we've already started the process of annexing that little stub finger of right-of-way that you see down there. I've highlighted in white. When that annexation happens, the next step of that process would be to take jurisdiction of it. Once the city has jurisdiction of that intersection, the city, can dictate what kind of changes we want to see there. Right now, the county has plans for what they'd like to see there. They aren't necessarily the same ones that the city has. And that's to be expected. The county's plans are more short-term and a little more blunt. We have some sort of broader plans for what we'd like to see happen in this area. And we would like to see the improvements that take place here be closer to what those long-term plans are. We've had very good discussions with the county. I know that I see Max with the county's city engineer with Marion County's on the phone. We've been working very closely with Marion County on this particular project, and not just the project that we're going to talk about in a quasi-judicial matter tonight, but also this intersection. Generally speaking, they're very supportive of it. They've been working with us on a lot of the details of what it would take to take over that jurisdiction. So we've got a lot of heads nodding. County's very supportive of that happening. We're going through that process. In fact, you would see that annexation application in probably 45, 60 days or so if that moves forward, because it would require a recommendation in the future. I say that again because there's conditions of approval that are relevant to that issue. I wanted you to have some understanding as to where that came from. Stepping back for a second into the overall TSP for the city's transportation system plan. You'll notice down in the southwest corner of this area, I've kind of brought that up and brought it up to highlight this site and what's going on in that area. You'll notice on the east side of this property, located in the black dots, you see Evergreen coming south. One of the requirements on this property owner is to complete those improvements along Evergreen, along their frontage, complete the improvements along the south portion of their property, which we're calling, and it's referenced in the staff report, as the local industrial street, and to actually finish that connection to Parr Road. There will be two parts to it. One's an interim connection, because there's just too many site constraints to make that a full-blown intersection yet. And I'll take a look, and at the end of the presentation, I'll show you what that'll look like on the ground. But I want you to understand it. This is the current TSP, and the application proposed is consistent with all the requirements that we have for the improvements required for this project to take place consistent with the existing TSP. In addition, the city also has some broader plans for this area. Because if you look on the southern part, that area of town, that southwest portion of town within our TSP, you can see kind of a vague gray area as to what's going to happen for the rest of Parr Road, the rest of what we call an important south arterial. And because we've had so much development activity out here, we're talking about 600 multifamily units up on Stacey Allison, the Smith development, we're seeing annexations on the south side of Parr Road. We're seeing obviously the Amazon project and some commercial facilities up on Evergreen. It's really brought to the attention that this needs to be updated to really recognize those and think a little bit more cohesively and holistically about what the city wants to do. So that we, the city, are going to be proposing doing a modification to the TSP just in this area. We need to do some significant modeling. And I can tell you what the issue is. You're all familiar with this. We've noticed that we have some significant issues on particularly Evergreen. A few other areas, but that's where it's really at. It's Evergreen and Hayes, Evergreen and 214, Evergreen and Stacey Allison. And all these projects have been contributing small amounts of money to try to solve that problem, but it really needs a broader look. And the reason I mention this is because this project is, again, a really important piece to that puzzle, because what the city's considering and is to finish this long, broad, red horizontal area you see at the bottom. That's what we call the South Arterial. It's in our TSP, but it doesn't really show the connection. That's the long-term plan for the city's transportation flow down here. It means moving, if you notice, the intersection of Butteville Road and Parr Road south of where it currently is. If you look at where that little thumb is down there on the south part of the screen, that piece is currently in the UGB. But if that urban reserve, that big box area comes in, we want to have a good transportation system plan that flows and works better. The goal, to make it really simple, is to pull as much traffic as we can, particularly the industrial traffic, off of Evergreen and bring it out to the existing roundabout that's under construction right now at the top of Butteville Road. That's being developed by Amazon, and it's being built significantly over capacity, so that we're trying to bring traffic around the outside of town, up through that intersection around Butteville Road, and to get them to I-5 that way. It also means moving the truck traffic into this urban reserve area, again, which is, and including this parcel. I didn't highlight it on here, but it's located on that white area right next to that red line. Moving as much of this truck traffic as we can onto what would be an alternative route, which is Stacey Allison, which is the other area you see that's at an angle there. That's essentially a frontage road along I-5. It's a better use for it. We're trying to separate as much of this truck traffic as we can off of Evergreen to solve some of those issues. Doesn't mean we're ignoring Evergreen. It means we need to come up with other solutions for those. Separating this traffic and doing these other improvements are part of the city's long-term plan. So the reason we've been working with this applicant, you see these specific conditions regarding items such as moving truck traffic off Evergreen, making the connection from at Parr and Evergreen for an interim connection now for them to get out there, and conditions involving traffic mitigation at Parr and Butteville Road, is because we want to make sure that this is developed so that it works in the short term to satisfy the needs of the applicant and our long-term needs. And that's what this does. So I'm sure they'll come up and say, it's taken us a while to get here. There's been a lot of negotiation and work with the applicant, and the county's been a very good partner here, because everything you see down there along Parr Road is currently within the county. And the letter that we got from Lennar, I think, is important, because Lennar is on the other side of this street and they're facing these same sort of issues. And Lennar has been supportive of the project, and that's the letter I'll read here at the end. But what I think is really important to understand is that the engineers for both Lennar and this spec development have been working together from day one to make sure that they're coordinating their efforts, because there's a lot of interface there on property that's currently in the county, going to be in the city, but needs to be modified for a long-term plan for what we have. It's pretty complicated, but we think these conditions in the site plans that came in meet both our long-term needs and the applicant's needs at the current time. Again, what I've highlighted here are just some of these hotspots that we've located. And our plan is to come and redo this area of the transportation system plan and identify exactly what changes we need to make this happen. so that we have a fully functioning and safe Butteville Road, a south arterial that works, moving as much traffic as we can off Evergreen, and what improvements do we need to make along Evergreen to reroute this traffic? So the reason I kind of wanted to introduce is all these are part and parcel to what we've been working on. I've had at least 3 meetings with the city council about the Butteville Road PAR issue. I've had a couple meetings with them already on doing this UGB expansion, what it would entail. We've already started both the annexation process, the memorandum of understanding process with the county, which involves what happens if we do take jurisdiction, and our special projects coordinator, Renata Wakely, is already working on working with a consultant to start to do the analysis that would let that UGB expansion take place. So that's sort of where we're at now. From there, I thought I would kind of jump into the project. And again, I think I just wanted to provide some context to explain the rationale behind a lot of these conditions. So as I probably already explained, this is part of the SWIR, the Southwest Light Industrial District, Southwest Industrial District. I have it highlighted there in black and with the yellow highlight. It's also part of the Interchange Management Area Overlay District. We have a lot of districts. I know they can get confusing. This one in particular was developed when the interchange was completed. The interchange project was completed. The city picked up a share of the improvements there, part of that tab essentially to pay for them. I want to say it was $8 million. Curtis may know better than me. Curtis, Public Works Director, is here nodding at me, by the way. And the one key element of that overlay district, it really serves 2 purposes. The idea is there to preserve traffic capacity at the interchange for these SWIR and industrial users, for these vacant properties, so that they wouldn't be used, so that that extra capacity that was built into the interchange wouldn't get sucked up by, say, commercial or residential developments. So this development is part and parcel with making sure that happens. The other component of that is to everybody within that district, if they're on the quote list, as this project is, they have to pay back some of that money to the city. I think of that as a reimbursement district. That might not be the legal term for it, but essentially we fronted a lot of money to do those improvements to increase capacity in I-5. Obviously the state picked up the vast majority of that bill, but the city did as well. And as these projects come online, because they're using that capacity, they're paying money back into the city. So when the applicant comes in and pays their system development charges, they'll be charged an additional transportation SDC fee that has a name I can't quite remember, that pays back into that sort of fund that we have, that we paid out for that money. There's no tenant proposed at this time, so it's essentially a shell building. Please go on.
Chris, before you go into the particulars of this site and this proposal, can we ask the commission if they understand what you've been talking about up to now? And do we have any questions concerning this transportation aspect of this public hearing? Commissioners, do you understand this?
I have a lot of questions. I understand it, but it doesn't help me much.
And
Also appreciate the background.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Piper. And just, again, I bring that up as background, and I'm happy to have a long work session and discussions about this. And of course, you're going to be involved in all these longer term projects and where they go. The council's just kicking them off. It just so happens that this project's front and center on it. So I wanted to give you some of that background for it. It's important to remember that the review you're doing tonight is simply on the application in front of you and whether or not it meets our WDO. Some of the conditions and the requirements that are in there that we've been working on are consistent with the long-term goals, but staff believes it clearly meets our requirements as it stands today as well. And that's the critical component for you. I appreciate that comment. SDCs, I talked about, system development charges will be determined at the time of the tenant permit. So what's a bit unusual, this is a shell permit. They're certainly allowed to build it. So they don't know who's going to be in the building yet. So it's been developed with a mix of uses to determine sort of the traffic impacts, the parking impacts, at about a 50-50 split is where it came in. One for sort of a warehouse, the other for more of a distribution center use. It works for the WDO as it stands. The traffic mitigation requirements, the generally off-site ones that are in the conditions of approval, are based on that mix. But staff wanted to make sure that we collect the most accurate SDCs possible when a tenant comes in. So when a tenant comes in, that's the time. In this particular case, this is unusual. We don't typically do this. We typically determine those SDCs and they're paid at time of building permit. In this case, we're going to allow the applicant to do all the public improvements, build the shell of the building, and when a tenant is known, then the SDCs will be determined at that time. It's the best way to determine what they're going to be. It's the way to get the most accurate SDCs. Again, it's not usually the case that we have to, but we want to do it in this case, and that's why it's a special condition of approval that's called out. So the property's right at the end there of Evergreen. It's kind of hard to get a feel for the property. You can't really drive out and see it, right? You can just see two pieces of it of right of way. Right here at the end, it's just a stub road, always intended for Evergreen to head south. Over on the right is the corner of, that's Paradise Point. That's the end of that subdivision. You can see it's full improvements all the way down to the edge there. I think that's a spec sign at the end of the road from last fall. On the other end, down at the southeast corner is Parr Road, where it connects on the other end. Again, not very much to see here. It's hard to get a feel for it. The applicant only has a very small portion of right-of-way down there. I want to say maybe 80 total feet, maybe even 60 total feet. And it's just a corner. So not only is it constrained by the city, there's very little right-of-way there. They're only the northwest corner. The east side of the street's still in the county, and the south side's outside the UGB. So that makes it very difficult to kind of fill in these gaps. So the applicant, we've worked with the applicant, and again, particularly the county, who's been a good partner with us here, to get this connection to the south side that'll work with all those different pieces in place. Some of it even involves getting an additional construction easement that the applicants work through with the neighbor to the south outside the UGB so that they can complete this south industrial road I'm going to show you here in a second. A few site plan elements, just kind of bringing you in. North is on the top of the screen, Evergreen Road's on the right side. And we call the industrial road on the south side that comes in, will be finished to the end of their property. So the improvements are essentially 3/4 improvements on both these streets because they don't control the other side. Those areas are not developed. When the opposite sides of the streets are developed, they'll complete their portion of it. But on the front of their property, it'll be all the improvements we require from landscaping, sidewalk, curbing, streets, etc. In terms of properties, 30 acres, generally the layout is so that the loading bays are facing north and south instead of out along the most prominent street on the east side. I have this sketched in green. This is not the official landscape plan. That will not surprise you, but I wanted to just kind of give you an idea of the fact that the emphasis and the most important concerns on this particular development were traffic, trying to move them in the right direction and minimize the impacts on the surrounding properties. And of course, adjacent on the north property line is an existing residential homes. Granted, this property is zoned for industrial uses, but those are still houses. So you'll see, and I'm sure if you look through the plan, that there's a really deep landscape buffer on the north side, and we wanted to make sure we have one on the east side as well. We'll talk about that and what that buffer looks like here in a second. In terms of access, there are 2 driveways on each frontage, 2 along Evergreen, 2 along the industrial road. The applicants can speak a little bit more towards the rationale behind the importance of having this kind of flow of truck traffic through there that makes sense. They develop a lot of industrial parcels. But I think what's important to note is that that central access on Evergreen is really designed for employee parking. And the northern one is set up for truck access. And the reason I call out that northern one is that one actually requires a variance. So there's one variance with the application. There are no on-site variances for the building, parking, et cetera. But there's one because the separation for that north driveway needs to be 240 feet from the surrounding driveways. And there's an existing driveway to the north that's about 170 feet apart, 70 feet away. Now, again, because I think it's really important that the truck traffic and truck vehicles have their own separate access and not be mixed with employees on site, that it's important that they be separated and kept as far apart as possible, which gets to the reason that driveway is pushed a bit to the north. I think the other component is we're going to talk about, or I'll mention shortly, the idea that in the future, the idea, assuming the city gets all the activities done they want to do, We assume they will, or we've already started doing those. If and when that happens, truck traffic is actually going to be limited from driving north on Evergreen. So it's going to be much less of an issue for that. The truck traffic that comes out of there will be going south, going down to Parr Road and swinging around Butteville the other way rather than coming back in. And I'll talk about that condition at the end. Again, I think that helps mitigate and address some of the issues of that, the single variance they have here for that separation. In terms of parking, they're proposing 440 parking spaces. That meets our requirements under the code. There's actually a range that's found in our code for these types of uses. And again, you'll notice they're located adjacent to the building in the back and in front of the building for the majority. The applicants here, they can speak more towards that. My understanding is the idea that, again, they're trying to separate the employee traffic, the employee parking from the trucks. So you'll see that extra lane on the west side of the property there to allow trucks to go around so they wouldn't interfere with the parking for employees. I want to look a little bit at that north elevation. I think that's the most important one. In general, the design of the building's pretty standard. I assume it's tilt-up wall construction. Overall height's 42 feet 6 inches, which meets the code. 45 is the cap for this zoning district. The building meets the requirements we have for architectural design. We don't have too specific the specific requirements for architecture. These types of buildings isn't too specific. These are big box industrial buildings. It's 500,000 square feet. On the east side, it's a bit different. It doesn't have the truck bays. I think there's some more office spaces and entrances for employees to get in on the east side. And along that north side, I want to focus in a little bit more on the landscaping and some of the issues around it, again, because there's a real focus here, and we've been trying to address the impacts on that neighbor as best we could within the code. Storm facilities located along there, which gives a little bit more of a buffer along that northern property line. I call out a little bit of the landscape plans you can see here. There's more detailed there's more details of exactly what kind of plantings going on in that area. But one thing I think is important to understand is along that north property line where it fronts the residence, there's a requirement in our code for what we call an architectural wall, which is a solid block wall that'll be constructed there. I think it's a CMU wall proposed. There's some specific architecture requirements about sort of the scoring, texture, color. Those are easy enough to condition. There's a condition of approval to that effect. It's proposed I think it's 7 feet 6 inches in height, and it's proposed right up adjacent to the adjacent property line, not directly adjacent to it. It'd have to be set back a little bit so that you can have a footer underneath the wall for these a wall of this stature and weight. Again, that's a code requirement that it be there. There were some discussions with the applicant about where exactly that should be. And I think what the applicant's done here is that they've decided, and as they said, it was sort of based on some feedback they got from neighbors, because as you can see in the picture here, all the neighbors here, I believe except for one, have a fence, their own fence on their property line. And if you were to set this wall, this architectural wall back onto the subject property some, as we sometimes like to do, and put landscaping in front of it, that results in this big dead area, essentially a big deep alley that's going to be, say, 250 feet long between the back of fences and this new wall. So the idea is it's better to squeeze them in a little bit closer, put the additional landscaping on the other side. It really lets these neighbors here have generally a little bit more space. Their de facto yards are going to be sort of a little bit deeper behind their fence. So it's always a tough decision as to where to put it. My understanding is based on feedback that the applicant had with some of those neighbors. This was a preferred method. It's not uncommon. It certainly seems something we could support, and it meets the code requirements. I should put out that the applicant, though wasn't required under the code, had a neighborhood meeting with these neighbors. I want to say maybe 10 months ago, could have been a year ago, just to talk about the project, what it was. At the time, the project was actually much larger. It's been scaled down a little bit since then. They can speak more to that when they're up here. In terms of a little bit more about what that buffer looks like on the north side, let me come back a bit. So there's some areas where there's some parking, some trailer parking that comes a little bit closer to the property. The rest of it's a little bit deeper. Those are what we call large trees under our code, which are minimum 10 feet height. Some of them are 2 inches. There's firs. There's a little bit of a mixture of trees in there, which is a little bit different. The The site provides more parking or more landscaping that's required than is required under our code. And again, we've been trying to push as much as we could on the north side. So at the deepest part of that landscape buffer, for the majority of that site's 80 feet, the smaller areas, the thinner spots will be a 30-foot landscape buffer in there, and all that'll be behind the wall. Another component to this might look familiar from the Amazon plan. This is probably because this was a much bigger issue for the Amazon property, was this idea of an extra large building. The Amazon building is 100 feet tall. And one of the questions that comes up is, what does that mean in terms of a shadow for other property owners around there? 100 feet can be pretty big. So in this case, again, this property meets the code requirements, but the applicant provided this additional graphic for us, which is, I'm going to try to get my days right. I believe it's the winter solstice. I'm looking over here. Winter solstice, which is essentially the day the sun is at the lowest point in the sky. Okay. And if you're looking at this on, so we're looking at sort of you'd be standing on Evergreen Road and looking in this direction. This would be the shadow that would be cast on that worst day of the year. The shadow cast from this building wouldn't go as far as the wall that reaches that's proposed on the northern property line here, and it wouldn't impact the adjacent homes to the east. In any case, they have their own fences out there that are 6 feet tall, which cast their own shadow about the same distance. So I think this is an important graphic because, especially when we're talking about larger buildings, not so much of this one, when they get a lot higher, this is something that people can do in CAD and put out there. And if they have to address it, it's something they may have to. In this case, it didn't cast a shadow as expected. And just if you're curious, the building height limitation on the residential properties are 35 feet, and it's 45 feet for the subject site. And the building proposed, I believe, is 42 feet 6 inches. That might be to top up parapet, but I may have them confirm. One more master plan. We have a lot of these big long range plans. This project is consistent with all of them, and I wanted to call this one out. We also have what's called a SWR master plan. When we brought the first project into the city as a SWR project, which is the Amazon property before it was actually developed by Amazon, the city council actually adopted a long range. How is this going to work in terms of water, sewer, storm, transportation? It's not a fixed in stone plan, but it just says, yeah, we can provide services in this specific way, and this is the way we want to do it. And that includes, as you can see here, including what looks like a Parr Road extension to the west. The idea was that this, quote, now it's become the industrial road along the south property line here, and continuing the extension of Evergreen. Those are the big transportation components that this project would complete. And I wanted to call that out because that is one of the code requirements in our WDO. I talked for a moment about that interchange management area. I won't spend a lot of time on it other than to call out that I made an error in my analysis and finding sheet. I mislabeled this. I called it subarea B as in Baker. It's D as in, I assume it's a dog, is the right one. I wanted to call that out, correct it, and call out how this project fits in and meets those requirements. So one of the WDO requirements for projects that are in this interchange management area, as this one is, it's in subarea D, is to meet this vehicle trip budget cap that we have. A short answer is that entire parcel is for D. There's around 1,200 peak hour vehicle trips allocated to that area. It could exceed it if we ever wanted to, if we ever get to that point. This is the first parcel in that area to be developed. So it's taking up, just for the record, 222 PM peak hour trips, which is essentially about, probably less than if you're doing sort of a back of the envelope ratio of how many acres is it for that whole area and how much is it taking. It's not necessary to do that, but there's certainly more than enough adequate capacity within that management area for future development.
Can
Yes,
I
ma'am.
ask then, the area D,
Mhm.
all of area D has 1,199 trips available?
That's correct. And what happens is, so we keep a running tab of these. So you can see A is the Amazon project. That took up a massive swath, if not all of A, and maybe even some more of B. I don't recall off the top of my head. So we need to keep tabs on these. That's a requirement of our interchange management area program and plan that we got adopted through the state. Back to, I think an important site plan element I wanted to call out is what this configuration is going to look like down at this very constrained intersection at Parr and Butteville. on your screen is the sort of ultimate plan, right? This is when all the pieces of the puzzle, and we're talking about probably all four sides of the intersection come in, unless the city comes in and decides to acquire property and do it themselves, which we are not going to be doing. We wait for development to do these things as they come in. The ultimate plan is to have Evergreen be a straight north-south with no stops, and the two stop bars would be on the east-west connection. And the west side of here is essentially the industrial road that would feed this industrial parcel, as well as the other ones. You see how that industrial road's really going to feed the remainder. Again, the city's long-term goal is to have those parcels, those properties fill around and either use Butteville Road to the west to get out and get to I-5, or to come out and use Stacy Allison so that you can avoid as much as you can on Evergreen. Short-term interim plan is a little bit different. It'll be an all-way stop there for them to come in, but it still meets all of the sight line and spacing and requirements that we have with both the county and our Public Works Department. So there's an interim plan for this to happen. This is the ultimate plan, called the ultimate, build out plan. I want to call out on the southwest corner of this is actually the Lennar property that we're not hearing tonight. Thought we would be, so it would kind of tie in nicely with that piece as well. The southeast corner that you see there is the Lennar property, and they've been working with the applicant, and this is referenced in the letter. I'll read it in a moment. Both engineers, they've been talking to each other, literally trading their plans back and forth, with the idea that this plan is being developed to develop the interim configuration that we want, providing all the right-of-way and easements that we need for the ultimate plan to happen. The southwest property, which is the residential piece that's proposed, is going to be coming in for an annexation in 30 days, would be doing the other half, and they are using this same plan so that it will fit together. Again, this has required a lot of coordination between these parties. One page, I thought I'd cover all the, real quick, the conditions of approval, and then I'll talk about the two letters that we have and one modification. So staff's recommendation is for approval of the application with the conditions that you have, including a modification to condition 6C that you have in front of you that I have on a slide on its own as well. That's the January 12th memo that I referenced. I talked about these, but I want to go over them very quickly again. The overall traffic mitigations that are included in those conditions of approval include completing that extension down to Parr Road, extending Evergreen and making that connection, completing the frontage improvements along the local industrial road so that it can continue further west when the next piece comes in, as well as a future truck access restriction on Evergreen North. This gets down to this idea, to oversimplify it, when and if there's a new truck route for trucks to leave this facility, they will use that facility and take advantage of it. There are also financial contributions being made to mitigate the impacts along Evergreen Road. Those are the ones that we highlighted. You're probably very familiar with them. They're the same mitigations and proportionate share we've been asking the other developers in this area to pay for their essentially proportionate share along Evergreen Road at those intersections I highlighted. Additionally, there's a financial contribution that's called out under condition 6 that deals with this idea of what will happen at Parr and Butteville Road. As I said, right now, it's currently under the jurisdiction of Marion County. So if the applicant were to come in today and develop, they would have to pay that mitigation money to Marion County because it's theirs. However, we fully anticipate taking jurisdiction of that. If they do, that money would be paid to us, the city. Now, the revised condition that you have in front of you essentially says that should that not line up exactly and they wind up paying the county, but before they get their building permits and do the other improvements before they start building this, and the city picks up the project later, and the county has our money, that when that money comes to the city, we'll reimburse the applicant the money that was paid to the county. The county's number, quote unquote, is higher than ours. So again, it's not our money, it's the county money. Something we certainly support, and it's the sort of appropriate thing to do. I call out again the additional SDC payment that's being made for that reimbursement district in the IMA. That's an SDC fee that's paid back to us, or a time of SDC. There's also transportation demand management measures that are called out in the condition of approval. When you're in that IMA, when you're in that interchange management area, one of our code provisions is that you actually have to implement a transportation demand management measures, right? These are individual things you do on a site to reduce your peak hour trips. That's the simple purpose of it. Those are listed in there in the condition of approval. Generally speaking, that includes incentives for transit, putting lockers and showers in your building to make it easier and encourage people to bike and walk to work, offering incentives like money and passes for people to take transit, encouraging people to carpool. Because these are more tenant-based, these are things that an employee does more than someone does now on a site plan. Those are things that get deferred down till I think it's 6 months after the first CO comes in. But all the requirements will be included with the conditions of approval. There's much more detail in there. There's very specific reporting requirements for the city. An on-site manager has to be designated. They have to identify these performance measures. The only site plan modifications I think are included are to do the enhanced bicycle amenities out there for essentially more spaces, better located, some covered areas. These are outside. Those will look familiar. Those are the ones we have in our newly adopted WDO. We recently modified our zoning code for these enhanced bicycle amenities. And the applicant's going to be conditioned and has been conditioned to do those enhanced amenities on site. And the last one, sort of to bring about and further these transportation demand management measures, is a specific financial contribution to the city to help enhance transit in this area. You probably guessed we do not actually run buses out there currently, but as you can see, we are definitely planning on it. We need to do that. We don't even run them right now at the Amazon site, but similar to the Amazon property, where we put a lot of very specific requirements for them to pay these different mitigations to help us run transit out there because it's critical to make it work. We have a condition in here, not just for these other measures, but a specific fee that the applicant's going to be paying. I think it's $63,000 off the top of my head. And again, that's consistent with what we've been charging other developers in this area. The modification, which is written in your list, I think I described what it was. If you decide to approve it, I would just ask that you include this actual condition of a modification to a condition. It's just, there's no strikeout with it. It's simply a newly added underline language. Again, it essentially says that if money's paid to Marion County and the city takes on the jurisdiction of the roadway before the improvements happen, we'll give back the applicant their portion of that money. We would still keep our proportionate share. All right. And I do want to point out, I did not include it in your package. That was my fault. I should have an actual letter we got from Lennar supporting this project. Lennar, again, is located to the southeast. I can read it into the record. I know some folks aren't here. They can't see it. One page. Is that all right? Sure. Not, if it were two, I probably wouldn't read it. So it's addressed to Chair Piper. It's from the Vice President of Land Development, David Force, with Lennar. It says Lennar provides this letter in support of the proposed spec industrial development. Lennar develops and builds residential communities throughout Oregon and Southwest Washington. Since 2021, Lennar has built over 100 homes in Woodburn Smith Creek community. It's pleased to propose the nearby Brighton Point community kitty corner from the spec development. That's the item that we had on the agenda tonight that's been postponed for 30 days. Over the past year, the Lennar and spec teams have worked cohesively to design mutual intersection improvements in compliance with local city of Woodburn and state jurisdiction requirements for their respective developments. This collaboration has resulted in a comprehensive shared intersection designed for Parr Road, east and south, future Industrial Way, and future Evergreen Road, the intersection. Throughout this process, the teams analyzed intersection improvement scenarios, working out potential conflicts and gaps along the way. As such, their individual proposed intersection improvements are aligned, designed to jurisdictional specifications, and prepared for construction commencing in any order. In addition to the seamless intersection link, each development's responsible for north-south frontage improvements along Evergreen, Parr, Evergreen Road Corridor, designed by the city's transportation system plan, our TSP, as a north-south connector to other east-west arterials. The corridor will see significant connections with the approval of both proposals. Together, the development's cumulative corridor improvements will fulfill key TSP needs, advancing transportation connectivity throughout Woodburn. Years of stakeholder input and jurisdictional planning yielded a comprehensive plan with a variety of complementary land uses in Woodburn. As new jobs arise with the spec development, Lennar looks forward to providing homes in close proximity, supporting the city as it accommodates new households near places of employment. Lennar supports the proposed spec development, which will provide jobs, public facility improvements, and increased vitality in Woodburn. Notably, transportation connections will improve along the Evergreen Evergreen corridor, connecting visitors, workers, and residents from points north and south. By approving the spec development, the city's prepared to realize years of planning for the future of Woodburn. I didn't receive any other correspondence. But anything else? Again, I have, if you have immediate questions for me, I know the applicant is here. I can return to images. And I have, if you need it, I can pull the motion back up.
Well, I'm just wondering about the transportation demand management measures. So that's for a tenant. We don't even know who that is. How is that managed by the city?
So the condition for it calls out that I believe it's within, let me read when it happens. So one of the reasons we like to push this down till I think it's 6 months after someone moves in, a new tenant. I'm briefly reading over it real fast. Once a tenant comes in, we want them to work with their employees as to what they're going to do. For example, if the city put on spec a requirement to provide these different types of amenities for workers, but we don't know what the shifts are, when people are working, where they're coming from, what the best time is, right? Maybe they all take, this is the question that came up a lot with Amazon. If there's one time when they have a massive rush of people who come for, say, maybe they have a 12-hour shift and everyone's coming, it might be the best approach might be to run a jitney themselves right up to our transit center, right? So that they can pick people up and run them out at a certain time. It might be a better idea to offer transit passes to folks. We don't know that. So what we prefer is to wait until someone opens their doors and then we can have a discussion with them so they can talk with their employees about what works best.
Well, I meant, how are you sure they're going to give you this report every year for 10 years?
Well, it's a requirement. That's why we make it a condition of approval. We could certainly cite them under the code if they're in violation of it.
And how do you know how many parking spaces if you don't know what kind of a business or?
So in this case, the applicant developed it. We've been working off this sort of 50-50 split. Okay. So part of it is, I can't think of the exact use, but think of it, one is sort of a warehouse, the other more of a distribution facility.
Who said half and half?
Right. That's sort of the way we did the traffic analysis is based on that, right? So you say, here's how much traffic we anticipate. If half the building's built out this way, here's how much traffic we anticipate. If it's built out the other way, it'll be that much. Without knowing the tenant, that seems like the safest way to make these determinations about off-site improvements. For the transportation system development charges, we want to know the exact number and who's coming and what they're paying. In terms of parking, our code is for industrial uses, it's actually pretty loose. It lets the planning director make a determination if a user has a different use that they think works better in terms of employees, they can do that. So you really park the number of employees that you have. These places don't get visitors. They just need enough parking for their employees. And we actually have a range in our parking code that lets you not exceed this number, but have this minimum number. This number, the number they have for, I forget the number exactly, 400 plus parking spaces, fell within that range. So it meets our immediate code. If perchance someone has a massive amount of employees and because of their shifts, they need more, they'll have to come in and do a modification to add more parking spaces.
So I have a concern about the projected route of traffic. Evergreen right now doesn't actually have any houses on it. It has 2 very large apartment complexes that are pretty full. And then another large apartment complex is being built on the Stacey Allison side. And yet you're talking about routing truck traffic on Stacey Allison, where there's absolutely no way you can know what the traffic pattern's going to be yet because nobody lives there. And yet Evergreen is being protected and not allowed to have any kind of 4-way stops or anything like that, so there's pretty much a straight shot for people to drive as fast as they want. And you're talking about adding big, huge trucks to come in for construction and then to the warehouse that's going to be speculatively built there. I have some huge concerns about how this is supposed to work.
So in terms of the current plan, right now, Evergreen is that's the route that trucks need to take to get to this area, right? They can come down Stacey Allison, but it's much easier, as you say, to utilize Evergreen. The long-range plan, when the rest of this SWR area gets developed, combined with all the adjacent residential development that's going on the, say, the east side of Evergreen, the rest of Parr Road, oh, thank you, Dan, and the rest of Parr Road, what the city wants to do is, that's the one, what the city wants to do is complete this sub-area plan for transportation and try to figure out what the best solutions are at these intersections. I don't know off the top of my head. Is it a stoplight at Hayes and a roundabout at Stacey Allison? Is it stopping everybody on that road? And when you combine all this truck traffic and the other, we need to find a better way to do it. So we're using the money that we're receiving to go out and hire somebody to tell us that best answer so that the city can look at it. We don't really have that long-term solution. Short-term, it will be Evergreen. That's what Evergreen is. That's what it will be. When and such a time it happens when we have an alternative route, whatever that might be, and that's really something for a future council to determine, that would move traffic in that alternate direction. Right now, we think the best route is probably going to be making Stacey Allison a formal truck route. It isn't today, but that feels like it might be the best solution. That way we can avoid all these intersections you see that have both safety and capacity issues that are highlighted on the screen. We can drive around those, particularly with the big truck traffic. That's the long range plan. And believe me, it's a long discussion to have. I understand exactly where you're coming from, Commissioner. It's frustrating to not have all the solutions for how this area is going to be developed and stipulated with projects set in stone. We don't have them now. What we have are identified needs, but we don't have the best solutions. And before we make those investments, whether it's Parr and Butteville or these other improvements on Evergreen, we want to make sure they're making the right decision. Otherwise, it's just lost money for us.
Isn't Smith Creek going to come out on Evergreen also?
Smith Creek won't. Smith Creek comes out on what I call Harvard stub. That's the end of it. It connects at Parr on the south. But there are other, I can take 1 second. There are certainly other developments that are going to be taking place that are going to impact Evergreen Road. This gap area you see, this is all within the UGB.
Yeah.
This big thumb in the center of this red area. Those are mostly commercial. Mostly residential. There's a small commercial in the corner. The rest of it's medium and high density residential. Dan, I'm looking at him. Probably lower and medium residential, nodal. So there's a lot going on and it's really come at us pretty fast. So we want to take just sort of step back and make sure we do this plan the right way in terms of transportation. That's our biggest issue.
So we're looking for solutions to getting along the frontage of I-5.
Yeah, and we think that's a pretty viable solution. The obvious one is quickly get as many trucks and people as we can out to Butteville Road to use that roundabout. That's by far the best solution, but that leads us to the Butteville Road, Parr Road problem that we have, which leads to us annexing that, bringing it in jurisdiction. And yeah, the city has a lot of work to do. And we think we have a pretty good plan to get there. I don't have all the answers as I sit here, but we're trying to keep all our options open at this point in time.
It always seems to come down to traffic,
It does indeed.
you know, and
Has
It's troubling.
construction traffic been taken into account?
It hasn't. We have not had discussions about construction traffic. We don't typically look at those under our WDO, under our zoning code. It's not a criteria that we have. Right, that's true, yeah. Dan was mentioning to me, Smith Creek had a restriction not to use Harvard when they came in, or to use
Yeah.
Killian.
Okay.
They all
And
said
nobody's
they're not-
policing that but the neighbors, and nobody listens to us. So that's quite all right, but that's just going to be a bigger problem. More construction continuing into this area that already has no way to manage that traffic. And this is a huge concern.
it all goes to Settlemyre now, Smith Creek. So
Yeah, and up to Hayes now, we have a new connection at the school there at Killian Springs.
right.
The city's issue, if you don't mind me just kind of stepping aside, is that the principal transportation problem in the city, you've heard me say this a lot, is no matter where you funnel this traffic, if you call it Killian Springs, Settlemyre, Parr, 99, they all go to the state facility that leads east and west through town. We need a different route out of town. That is the long-term solution. We need an arterial, a different way to move traffic so then I can move people off of Evergreen. I can put them on Stacey Allison. And when they're on Stacey Allison, they're going to connect at Evergreen further north. I can put you on Killian Springs. You're going to hit Hayes, then you're going to hit Evergreen on one side and Settlemyre on the other. And eventually all the traffic moves north to 214. That big picture, that's the big picture problem. Obviously, there's lots of things we can do at various intersections. Make sure we have all these different connections, put in the TDM measures we have. They're all important. That south arterial and making a plan to move people in a different direction is critical. We want to see that happen. That alleviates a tremendous amount of traffic. We're not there yet.
So with that, and with the mention of 214 as well, being that I-5 big vein there, is there any future plans on making that that overpass on the southern side be an exit on and off ramp of I-5?
Yeah, that comes up often. I'm absolutely certain that is not in the cards. It's never been discussed. I get asked all the time about a new entrance, a new exit, any way to get back on 5. Every discussions we've ever had with ODOT have all shot it down quickly and strenuously. No, I would love to see it. I think it would be fantastic. Even if it was just one, didn't have to be a full access. Because of the location of the other one and the capacity of our existing interchange, ODOT has told us there is no chance of that happening in the short term. I'm sorry. I always apologize whenever I tell that to people.
Any other questions for staff before we move on? Okay. We'll move on to testimony by the applicant. Please come to the lectern, give us your name and address.
Red means hot, so if it's dark and you press it, it will light up.
Red looks good.
Press and hold, or switch and it's always on.
Good. Chair Piper, Commissioners, my name is Greg Specht. My address is 10260 Southwest Greenberg Road in Portland. I come before you to speak in favor of our design review application for our industrial building on the 30 acres we own in Evergreen. I would be remiss if I did not say that I want to reach out and compliment Community Development Director Kerr and his staff for working with us for the past year to try and reach conditions of approval that work for us, that appear to work for the city. We're very pleased with the design and the evolution of this project. We've been involved in Woodburn since 2011, since we picked up option on the land that is now inside the city in the SWR. And lastly, I am here to answer questions to the extent that I am able to do so tonight. And thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Lee Layton. I'm a land use planner with the McKenzie firm at 1515 Southeast Water Avenue, Suite 100 in Portland, 97214. Well, as usual, your planning director has given as thorough a presentation as he has a review of our work on this project. So he's stolen all my thunder because there simply isn't very much I feel I need to tell you about. Also available here with me this evening is the traffic engineer on the project, Brent Arendt at McKenzie. And online with us are the civil engineers, Ralph Henderson and Nicole Burrell, and the landscape architect, Nicole Ferreira. So if you have questions about any aspect of this proposal, the entire design team is mobilized to support this request and respond to any of those. We feel very strongly that the questions that have been raised about traffic and circulation and so forth, these are real issues for a growing community like Woodburn, and for Woodburn specifically. We totally get that. It's shown up in our traffic analysis and other things. We've done a tremendous amount of work to show that the traffic patterns that this project will generate actually will function satisfactorily. Or we would be having a whole different conversation. If we had failing intersections, that would be a completely different analysis and we wouldn't have a favorable staff recommendation. So I think your staff is seeing that this project is actually part of the solution. It will construct Evergreen Road south of its existing terminus, and it will make an important network connection to Parr Road. That's a very important piece of implementing the transportation system plan for the whole community. It's been coordinated so that when the Lennar project goes forward, all of our work has matched the horizontal and vertical alignments. We know that the road alignment's going to work, the drainage is going to work. All of that engineering work has been done and reviewed by your engineering staff. So this really is queued up to be a successful project that moves the city's overall planning forward and makes, as Chris noted, the very substantial financial contributions to the effort to understand and remediate these affected intersections. And that's not in dispute. Those are conditions of approval, and are my clients okay with those? I do want to tell you about the plantings on the north property line adjacent to the residential properties to the north. We've paid great attention to being a good neighbor there. And that 30-foot corridor has the wall at the very north edge, as Chris explained. And that still gives us about 25 to 28 feet to work in for a double row of tree plantings, and they're offset from each other. So there will be a mix of deciduous trees, a few evergreen trees just to provide a rhythm, but mostly deciduous trees. And the concept there is that in the summertime, when they're all leafed out, they'll provide, their canopies will overlap enough to provide a dense visual screen, and the neighbors won't really see much of that building from their yards at all. But in the wintertime, when the sun is low in the sky, when it's out at all here in Oregon, those trees will be barren, and we'll keep providing as much light as we can on those trees. So that plus the required architectural wall for noise control is going to be a very a good neighbor relationship between these two. We talked with them about that at the neighborhood meeting, and I think they understood, and hopefully that's why I don't see any neighbors I recognize here this evening, so we'll see. There was a question about the transportation demand management practices and how that works. I agree with everything Chris said about implementing that as the tenants move in, because that's when they learn where people are commuting from. Until you know that, you don't really know what to do programmatically. But that is actually a state program that is supported by a lot of work on best management practices. So there's really good guidance available from the state on how to do those kinds of programs. They've been in use for over 10 years, I think more than that now. So there's quite a body of knowledge that contributes to implementing those. And an annual reporting requirement is routine. So it's not a big deal. It's a requirement for employers of more than 50 people at a given location to do a TDM plan. So you may not be familiar with it, but we are. There was a question about the parking ratio and how do we know how much is enough? There are two really valuable sources of data. One is the Institute for Transportation Engineers, which has done published research that is periodically updated, where they look at different types of land uses and they do survey research and analysis. And that provides the statistics, which are the basis for the city adopting things like the minimum and maximum allowed parking ratios. So that has already been, it's kind of baked into the city's standards, but also Spec Development Company is a developer and a lessor of multiple tenant lease spaces in industrial buildings all over the region, and they know exactly what their customers are asking for. So there's a really good knowledge on the part of our client on a pro forma basis of we need the parking to be in this range relative to the size of the building, because that's going to be the sweet spot that our customers are asking us for. So this project specifications are informed by that close market knowledge of our client, as well as meeting the city standards. I think those are the only things I really felt the need to touch on and add to Mr. Kerr's staff report. But again, we invite your questions and we're available to answer any technical. We can drill down as deep as you want to go on anything technical on this project. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the commission to the applicant at this time? Hearing none. We will move to testimonies by proponents or those people other than the applicant that are in favor of the project. Seeing none, we'll have testimony by opponents, those who are opposed to the project. Hearing none, there's no real reason for rebuttal. And once again, if the commission has no questions for staff or for the applicant, I will close the public hearing. Hearing none, I will officially close the public hearing and we will deliberate. Let me start this off this evening. I recognize a good number of faces with the spec people from years gone by and other projects. And I've always found their projects to be well done, to see to that they are good citizens that want to work with our staff and contribute to our community. So personally, I am very much in favor of this project. Do other commissioners have anything to say?
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I haven't got that background, but I mean, just the testimony, the good meeting with the neighborhood and, you know, the efforts made to have a barrier between the houses and the project. I mean, I think it sounds great personally.
I wanted to ask if there were significant trees, not just plum trees. I forgot.
Well, they're 10 feet. There's a certain number of 10 feet with a 2-inch caliber. I don't think there are significant trees. Well, they don't put in significant.
I don't think they're going to be.
I know.
It's going to be nice.
Online people, do you have any comments?
As for what I know, the area and the concerns for traffic, which obviously are ongoing, knowing that there was a community meeting and there is no one from the community here to give testimony against, I actually take that as a good sign as well.
I still have serious concerns about traffic patterns, construction patterns, and it's really difficult. I don't have a problem with Woodburn growing and adding more business, but this is a massive facility with no idea who's going to be in it. No idea how many people are going to be working in it, what kind of business is going to come in and out of it. And I just have concerns that there really are no answers for right now.
I kind of feel that there's a more parking's concerned. These same kinds of thoughts and feelings came up with the Woodburn Place apartments on Highway 211 here recently. my comment then was, if you build it, they will come, meaning if we create a big enough problem, it will have to be dealt with. It also strikes me as a chicken or the egg thing. Ideally, the transportation system would be in place ahead of these developments. But the economic reality is that the city doesn't have the funds to put these roads and streets and whatnot, intersections in place on their own ahead of time. So we as citizens of the community, unfortunately, are going to have to struggle with, in the short term, hopefully the short term, with some traffic problems as these situations get mitigated. I think SPECT has done a wonderful job of stepping up and doing, frankly, more than their share to assist the city in moving this ball down the road. Getting Evergreen Road connected out to PAR, I think, is extremely significant for that whole southern region. And I have every confidence that PAR Road and Butteville Road will be redone. And soon the rounder on 214 will be done. And if I'm a truck driver, which I haven't been a truck driver for about 40 years, I can tell you I'd be going out south. I would not be wanting to go through and up Evergreen Road and into that congestion at all. If there was an easier route that is longer, I don't care. Truck drivers don't want to be involved with cars and domestic issues any more than we want them to be there.
Can I ask
Go ahead.
the length of time to complete this project? Do you have any idea?
Do you have a time frame? Yes, please.
We recently completed a similar sized project in Ridgefield, 470,000 feet. It was completed in August. So construction takes about a year. We had anticipated beginning construction this summer, spring. That was our target date. With what's happened in the capital markets, we're taking another look at that. I mean, we're sensitive to that. We believe there's an ocean of money to partner with us as we partner on all our projects. But we do not have our financial structure in place right now. But I started building speculative warehouses in the late 80s. And so I've been doing this for a while, and this will be the fourth 500,000 square foot building we've built in the last 5 years. And they've all been built on speculation. And so we will build this, and we feel very comfortable that the demand is there in the tenant marketplace. We don't yet know what type of tenant we'll get, other than we believe that the 50-50 split between distribution and warehousing is consistent with what we've seen previously. It's a long answer to your question, but we hope to begin this year. If we don't begin by August or September, then it'll be in 24 when we start.
Considering what the market is now, do you anticipate that being a problem for anything?
No, we believe that what's going on worldwide with regard to supply chain issues, e-commerce, the lack of land for additional industrial development, all speak to continued demand. So we feel comfortable with this project. We feel it's very attractive locationally, right next to I-5, in a metropolitan area, next to a metropolitan area. So, all the signs are good. Thank you.
Thank you. If there aren't any other thoughts or comments from the commission, the chair would entertain a motion.
I have a motion. I move the Planning Commission approve applications DR 2202, EXCP 22-01, and VAR 2201 for speculative industrial development, subject to the conditions of the staff report, modifying condition 6C as shown in the director's memo of January 12th, 2023, and a final order be prepared for the signature of the chair.
Second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consolidated package for spec industrial development. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries with one dissenting vote.
She said,
She
aye.
just late saying.
No, she said aye. She was
Said aye.
late.
Okay. Is
Sorry,
that
no,
accurate?
no, I'm opposed. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Oh.
okay.
Yeah.
So there is one dissenting vote, but the motion carries. Thank you. Commissioners, thank you for your time. Oh, let's see. Yep, where's my agenda? I think there's too much left here. Got it buried here. Thank you. Thank you. Under the heading of business from the commission, I have a comment concerning trees. Something for the commission to think about. When we discuss reports by arborists on trees, that report speaks to the health of the tree only. There are oftentimes other mitigating factors, shall we say, proximity to foundations, et cetera, that should be considered that a arborist will not consider. And I think we should look at identifying an additional expert, if you will, that can speak to these other mitigating factors. And what comes to mind initially is, what does the Parks Department do?
That's a good idea.
Maybe we need to take this ball and throw it in the middle of their lap and say, we're looking for some help on this subject. This is not anything that we really need to get into tonight, but the subject came to me.
Yeah, some unbiased party
Yes,
who can yes,
like-
witness
like
that
an
the
ar-
driveway is buckling.
like an arborist, only that speaks to other
He
issues.
doesn't actually have to be paid separately.
Does Public Works have anybody in there? It's a recommendation. So, can't hear me?
I just wanted to make you get up, Curtis.
Yeah. Just give me a microphone over there. Hi, Curtis Stoltz, Public Works Director for the City of Woodburn. Our Public Works Department does have for the street trees, we do have a permit process that they apply for to take out the street trees, which requires an arborist report. And then our engineering department also looks at the mitigating factors such as heaving the sidewalks, site obstructions, and those type of things too close to foundations or something like that. That would be a reason that we would want to take the tree out, as well as if it's a healthy tree, but there are other issues involved with it. So we do go through those, and then those are approved by the Public Works Director.
Is that something that Public Works would want to get involved in with regard to non-city trees? In other
So
words,
for
those
private-
on private property.
Private property. It could be, because I mean, I guess we would look at it the same way as we would a street tree as far as what those mitigating factors were. I mean, we do have the expertise to kind of look at it from that perspective and give a recommendation.
Okay, okay. All food for thought.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, wouldn't even an arborist, I mean, I had a tree that the roots were sort of under the house,
Yeah.
you know? So we took it out because the weight of the tree, who knows?
Sure.
So, I mean, an arborist would be able to determine that, wouldn't they? Or,
But I don't think they do. I think
they
the arborist
wouldn't.
says it's a healthy tree, It's not a healthy tree.
Yeah.
Get the
Owner
house.
Who has a healthy tree, but they want someone to help them say, yes, the tree
But
needs to go.
there are-
into the foundation.
there are other factors involved because they do have a risk. They have a risk matrix that they go through. So like if a tree is in a position where it can fall and cause property damage or personal damage to someone if it was to fall down, even if it is a healthy tree, maybe it's leaning a lot or there's problems with the foundation where the roots are only growing on one side. Those factors are looked at by the arborist, and then they do have a rating system on it that they don't necessarily will say, you know, it has to come out, but they give you that this risk is here and it's at this level. And then they let you make the determination as, you know, as to what the risk is going to be. So.
And
Again,
Chair Piper.
yes,
And also,
yes.
my understanding was, and part of the comments when we were having this discussion before was, you know, if a person has already had to pay to fix any plumbing, sidewalk or anything on their property, that was enough to at least be reason to remove a tree without having to pay an additional arborist, because that was part of the conversation is, you know, having to pay another expert when you already have these other expenses.
I think the mindset was we have to have an arborist, and I really think that might be the wrong mindset. We have a
Yes.
whole city staff. Maybe that's where we should go first. And if there's another need for an arborist, then we can do that. I don't know.
As I say, I did not bring this up to start a workshop tonight. I
It's
simply,
about trees.
I simply, yeah, if we're gonna have a discussion, it probably should be on transportation system plans, but I simply, it rose up on my radar, I guess you might say, and I just wanted to bring it to the commission's attention to put in their thought process. So when we do come back to trees, we can be thinking, maybe have a discussion there. Updates from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of super brief items for you. First of all, I will defer to Mackenzie. I want her to give a quick description of the Luba decision, which came back. As you know, we had a gas station case, which was denied by the city. We prepared findings for it. They were adopted. The applicant filed a Luba appeal, and we've been going through that process. Mackenzie has been leading that charge. Please fill everybody in, Mackenzie.
Yes, so on Tuesday, we did receive notice from LUBA, which is the Land Use Board of Appeals. It's a state agency that reviews these city decisions, and they affirmed the city's decision to deny the gas station. So the city council's decision denying the project will remain. There's still always another opportunity for the applicant to appeal. That would go to the State Court of Appeals level next. If that were to occur, we'd know in the next 2.5 weeks. So it's a pretty short timeline for them to make a decision, but we feel pretty pleased with the outcome. A lot of times decisions that go to LUBA get remanded back for additional hearings and findings at the city level. So a affirmance of the city's decision is a pretty good outcome and speaks to, staff's work on the findings and the decision itself.
By the way, she's being very modest. She's responsible for it. I'll say for her. She deserves kudos for getting that done and being successful defending the city's case.
So then what's likely to happen? They are going to come back and, they still own the property and obviously have plans.
So at this point, we can't speak for what will happen. I can tell you what the code says. First of all, as Mackenzie mentioned, there's still an appeal opportunity for them outside the LUBA court. May happen. In either case, the land use decision is dead as it stands, assuming they don't appeal, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's pretty unlikely. In terms of what happens on that property, our code is actually very specific about what happens when a project is withdrawn or denied. You are not allowed to come back in with the same or similar project than one that was denied by the council. Wow. And there's a reason for that. They don't want people to just sort of keep taking different bites at the apple over and over, wasting everybody's time until they get an approval. So there's a 1-year waiting period unless they come in with one that's substantially different.
So I noticed that they took the fences down and there's been a bunch of people camping in there. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the people who own the property? Should they have put the fences back up, or I'm not sure why they took them down, but there's been like RVs and tents and all kinds of stuff back in the corner as I walk by in the morning in the dark. I'm
Yeah,
just
I can
curious.
speak to that a little bit. So yeah, the fencing, it's been actually a bit of an issue, really, I think since the fall. I drive by there every day and, anytime the wind blows, it falls over. But particularly that very high wind that we had just before the Christmas holiday knocked it over again. And the understanding or the communication that I have received is that the fence has become basically permanently damaged. And because it's rented, they haven't been able to re-rent new fencing. I am hopeful that new fencing will go back up. We had to work with our city code enforcement on an almost daily basis for about 10 days to get the people that had moved onto the site to leave that site. There were, RVs and some tents and transient individuals that had tried to occupy the site. So that did take a bit of work. They have left the site. Again, we are encouraging the property owner to put fencing back up. It's not a code requirement to do so, but of course, not having it up, can lead to these other issues. But from a code enforcement standpoint, it is on their radar. It's, something that they're going to go back and continually monitor and continue to check.
Thank you.
Is that the extent of our updates, boss?
I have, just to let everybody know, we have at least 3 full agendas for the next 3 meetings. The next meeting in 2 weeks, we have 3 items, 2 small variances, and then an addition to a commercial/industrial site. After that, we have an annexation. We'll have the Brighton Point project, which is the parcel that's catty corner, the one we just heard about. And a few more coming down the line. It's a very consistent stream of development activity, all coming before you. As always, I really appreciate you guys putting in the time. There's a lot of reading, a lot of work. These things are complicated. Keep giving us feedback as to what we can do to help you kind of parse through these. I was just getting some comments earlier from Commissioner Corning on some detailed things to help. I'm always looking for it. Let me know, or else I don't know what to fix.
You want these back?
I would love to have them back. And that's the case for any kind of plans, reports you all receive. You're welcome to write on them. You can use them you can put them in the fireplace if you like. If you don't touch them, I'd love to have them back. It saves us some kind of copy work. Sometimes we have filing requirements. Sometimes these go to the city council and I need more copies.
What I'm referring to, commissioners, is that large book from McKinsey on the spec project that we got.
This thing?
That thing, yes. Okay, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I move to adjourn.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
It's there for Lisa. She was here. You weren't here.